I think that movies depend so much on rhythm. They are so close to music, a movie is. Closer to music than a drama of the theater. That if the sound and the rhythm of the sound, above all the rhythm, is wrong, no image can save it. It's not only what you say, but the rhythm and speed of all the voices in a scene. So I often, when I direct, turn my back on the scene.
Hello everyone and welcome to Tales of Cinema, the podcast, episode 5.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive! It's alive! Oh, in the name of God! Now I know what it feels like to be God!
Today we're going to explore a different side of entertainment and fun in cinema. I'm going to talk about the 1989 Dead Calm, directed by Phillip Noyce with Sam Neill, Nicole Kidman and Billy Zane.
Jump, Ray! Jump! Get up, Ray! Leave it!
So why is it a little bit different than usual is because this film is quite intense to go through. It's a psychological thriller horror film, but it does contain a sense of fun, a sense of thrilling, a sense of entertainment, but through a different angle, through different tones that we've seen previously with the first podcast. Just a little bit about the director himself, Phillip Noyce. He was born in 1950, he's an Australian filmmaker. He was basically part of what will be called the Australian New Wave, mostly in the 70s, 80s. As a side track of this, after the 1960s and the initial French New Wave, you will see loads of different new waves appearing up to the 80s around the world. So it spawned the new Hollywood in America, new waves in different European countries, up to the Hong Kong New Wave in the 80s. And Australia is no different. They had their own New Wave. Usually they just call it New Wave and the name of the country just before it. So here is the Australian New Wave, and their most known directors, Gillian Armstrong, Peter Weir, Bruce Beresford, George Miller and Paul Cox. Those are the big names of that Australian New Wave. Most of those directors will move on to Hollywood at one point or another. Phillip Noyce started doing a couple of documentaries. I haven't seen his early Australian films, so I don't really know if they're worth a watch, if they're actually good, but it seems to be, because otherwise he wouldn't have been dubbed part of this new wave. So he made Backroads in 77, followed by Newsfront in 78, and Heatwave in 82. During that time, he will also work in television on two Australian series called The Dismissal and The Cora Breakout. At that point, he will meet another Australian filmmaker, very renowned, George Miller, director of the Mad Max franchise, who was himself interested in television at that point. So they became friends, and at that time, Phillip Noyce becomes aware of the novel Dead Calm by Charles Williams, read it, and think it's fantastic. He decides, wow, this is a really good idea. We should make a film out of this, knowing that Orson Welles struggled for a long time to make an adaptation of that book called The Deep. The film was never finished and never released. Maybe we'll get to see some footage soon. That would be interesting. Anyway, Phillip Noyce thought it was a good starting point for a film and showed the book to George Miller, who really liked it as well and who decided to produce the film. That should tell you quite a lot, because for a guy like George Miller to get involved into a film like this, there must be something into it, some kind of mythological journey, because that's what George Miller is attracted to. So it should give you a hint of what's to come. After the relative success of Dead Calm, Phillip Noyce will move to the US and start making a few successful films there. So Blind Fury with Rutger Hauer, Patriot Games, one of his most famous, with Harrison Ford and Sean Bean. He will make a sequel out of this called Clear and Present Danger in the 90s. The Saint with Val Kilmer, The Bone Collector with Denzel Washington, and will come back in the early 2000s in Australia to make one of the most awarded Australian films in recent years, Rabbit Proof Fence. In the late years, he hasn't been doing very well. He made Salt, that film with Angelina Jolie, very confusing film, wasn't very successful. He made a couple more films after that, but his career is clearly on the downward path.
What's your trouble, Mr. Warner?
Trouble is she's going down. That's the trouble. She's not gonna last the morning.
You sure?
Yeah, she opened up all over.
Has the water hit your engine?
My engine, radio, the fucking bulkhead, galleys, everything. My only chance was to try to reach you in the dinghy.
The plot is actually quite simple and quite efficient. We follow a couple played by Sam Neill and Nicole Kidman, respectively, as Captain John Ingram and Ray Ingram, husband and wife. At the beginning of the film, some tragic event happens and they decide to go for weeks on a boat at sea and spend some time together and try to overcome this tragic event and try to reconnect with each other. While at sea, they come across a boat with only one survivor, played by Billy Zane. His character is called Huey, and he's in shock. He's been stranded at sea for a long time on a sinking ship. And that's it. That's the starting point of the film, the plot of the film. This couple trying to reconnect, and this stranger that comes between them, stirring things up. It's a very Hitchcockian film. That's one of the reasons why I like to talk about it, because it's very playful. It's playing with your mind, playing with your expectations, playing with your emotion, your feelings, playing with all this. The way Hitchcock used to do it. First of all, the characters and the way the plot is arranged is very reminiscent of some of his films. That's the kind of plot that Hitchcock liked. I'm warning you though, you're gonna go through a lot of emotion during that film. It's not caressing you nicely, it's holding you very tight and squeezing even harder at some moments and letting go and squeezing again. And it's a very intense and powerful ride, I would say, in that sense. And that's one of the things that make it so interesting and so fun to go through. And come to think of it, there is an Australian craziness to it, an Aussie side, something that makes it even more twisted, even crazier. It's even more enjoyable thanks to that. So I mentioned George Miller earlier. That's quite important because, well, I don't want to be mean towards Phillip Noyce. Patriot Games is an enjoyable film. It's not the best of the Tom Clancy adaptations, but it's an enjoyable film. Harrison Ford put up a good performance. Sean Bean is probably the most interesting part in that film. But when you look at Phillip Noyce's filmography, he's not the best director ever, and he will show right after in Blind Fury. I would say the success and the efficient side of Dead Calm could be associated with George Miller because he's producer on the film and he's also second unit director and apparently directed quite a few sequences in the film. Some who did make it into the final cut, some who didn't. But you can tell his hand is very present. His print is there on the film. The way it's shot, the camera movements, the long, elegant camera movements, the composition of the frames, the way the characters are put within the frame, and the way the camera plays with the water, the sea, the reflection of the sun, that type of stuff. It's the type of thing you would see more in a George Miller film rather than Phillip Noyce film. This powerful editing that constantly goes from large, wide shots, wide angles, where you have the sea, the boat, and the character in the middle of it, and then suddenly close-up shots, real close-ups on the faces, on the eyes, on having a balance in between all these shots in the editing, all these different angles. Create some kind of tension that you would see more in the Twilight Zone, the movie, for example. The last segment is made by George Miller. He uses that a lot, or during the car chases in Mad Max 2, for example. That's something to keep in mind if you watch the film, and if you know a bit of George Miller style. Watch Mad Max Fury Road or The Road Warrior, and make a comparison with Dead Calm, and it's really, really striking.
Looks good.
It is. Do you want some?
No.
Oh, come on. You do. Come on, have it.
Yeah, now look.
Do you want it?
I want. Thank you.
I better go and get dressed. Keep it. Make me another one.
Another element that is quite important to specify, the film is now a bit more liked by the audience. It has some kind of cult status, at least for some film goers, but it's regularly criticized for being over the top and for a lot of things happening in the film that are not really realistic. Remember, I mentioned in the episode 2 that a film doesn't take place in reality, it takes place in the reality of that particular story, in the reality of that particular director, creator, screenwriter. You don't judge this through the prism of reality, but through the internal logic of the film. And in that sense, everything that happens in the film is explained, has somehow an explanation, whether it's the fact that the character John, played by Sam Neill, knows how to repair a boat, use it even though he never used that particular boat before. He's in the Navy, he's a captain as well, he's an officer, he knows a lot of things, so it makes you accept all this. The craziness of some situation as well. It all makes sense, but with the internal logic of the film. And what I would say, without, I don't want to spoil it, because there's a little twist that could also explain why it's so eerie, why it's so dreamy. I think the main character of that film is Rai, played by Nicole Kidman, and you're basically in a heightened reality, different reality, through her eyes, because of the condition she is in. You just have to watch the film to understand. And you are actually going through her own journey within. So I'm not going to say too much about it, but there's something happening at the beginning of the film that could, or could not, it depends on your interpretation, but that could be important, and that could explain why it's so over the top. But I'm not going to say too much. Just watch the film and tell me if you agree with me. As an example of this efficient camera work and editing that goes throughout the entire film, I'm just going to talk a little bit about the opening of the film. It's a great way to open a film. Again, it's very Hitchcockian. First of all, you have that long opening credit scene with the title in red, Dead Calm, coming, and it's quite long, and you go through the entire credit without silence and progressively adding sound and adding a sense of craziness into it. It already puts you in the mood of what the film is going to be and what it's going to be about. And then you have that opening scene where you're in a train station, it's very busy, and you have what seems to be a tracking shot on the left, and you see all those Navy guys arriving, being happy and everything, and then Sam Neill's character come still within the same shot. Sam Neill's character appear, and you realize that the camera wasn't moving. It was the train arriving on the right. The camera was still, and then you follow Sam Neill going off the train, and that's exactly that at that point that the camera movement starts, and it goes up and up like as if it was a dolly shot. I think it's a dolly shot, and the camera slowly reveals the entire train station and Sam Neill getting inside this crowd of people, of the Navy guys and their families and their loved ones. There's that whole ebullition of emotions, and Sam Neill lost in that crowd, not being able to find his wife. It's a really clever camera movement. Then you have a crossfade symbolizing time passing. Still all those Navy guys still being happy and having their families, and a lot of them leaving the train station. It's a lot less crowded, but you still have that kind of craziness, that kind of Yeah, loads of emotion, people playing music and stuff. And then you have that camera movement, that circular camera movement around Sam Neill, looking at his watch, looking around, and then suddenly the camera reveals by doing another circular movement representing Sam Neill's eyes, they come into contact with two police officers. Then at that moment, Sam Neill's character and the audience realize something's wrong. You don't need any dialogue, there's no dialogue in that scene whatsoever. And it cuts to a high angle vertical shot, including the whole train station. Sam Neill slowly going towards the police officers, and they talk, and you instantly know what's happening. Then there's another crossfade, and you get Sam Neill's character in the police car. We don't know yet the extent of what happened, but we know it's very serious, very tragic. Just by camera movement, editing, and acting performance, it gets you into the mood of what the film is going to be and how the film is going to be made. It's constantly throughout the film the same technique, the same way of doing things, the same way of making you understand through the essence, through the tools of cinema. And in that way, it makes it even more of a ride, even more of an entertaining film, even more of an intense film. One word about the end. The original ending was a bit more ambiguous and is actually contained within this cut. The studio wasn't very happy with the ambiguity of the end and asked for a reshoot and an added end. This end is over the top, like some other things in the film, but as opposed to the rest of the film, some of those actions that seemed over the top made sense. Logical sense with the story, with what you're watching, with the aim of that film. But this ending fits well with, in terms of craziness, with what you've seen in the film, but it doesn't fit with the internal logic of the film. And that makes this ending a little bit laughable. It makes it too much. So just bear in mind that basically you have two ends in the film, and you can see them successively, and you can decide which one of them works the best. Personally, I would say the original ending works the best. The one that they added is too much and laughable. So keep that in mind, and and tell me which ending you think works best.
Is it the boat? John, is it sinking? Okay. How long?
Hours? How many, 2?
Four?
Here we are. So as a conclusion, I would say it's a little bit different from what I've talked about in terms of fun and entertainment. It's a very intense film, so I'm warning you, you have to hold on to your seat. You'll get through a lot of intense emotions. It's basically a really, really fun and intense ride. It's very Hitchcockian, very elegant. It takes its time. There's very little dialogue. Everything is explained through the camera work, through the editing, and that's what makes this film thrilling, really. I think George Miller had more than his print on the film. It's all over the film that he's been there working as a producer and second unit director, and probably have some saying during the editing as well. You can see it, so it's interesting as well to put that in perspective with other Phillip Noyce films and other George Miller films, and try to understand why this particular film worked. There's a really good Blu-ray edition. Unfortunately, so the US import, it's a region free, so you won't have any problems playing it. The main problem is the price of it. Because it's a US import, it's a bit more expensive than it should be. But trust me, it's worth it. That's it, guys. I hope you enjoyed this little podcast, and I hope you will enjoy this Aussie craziness, this Australian thriller with Hitchcockian vibes to it. Incredible performances, incredible camera work. Watch the film and let me know what you will think of it. But for now, I will leave you with the wise words of Sam Neill. Bye, everybody.
Don't say that. Now look. We've got weeks and weeks. Calm days, calm seas. And we're gonna get strong. And when you're strong, then we'll go and we'll start again.